we on then this is episode 12 for your podcast. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
episode 12 of Around the Bed and podcast. I have the pleasure of having you here, Brent. You want to give a tiny bit about your background for everyone?
Yeah, so my name is Brent. I've been working in computing and specifically data for 18, 19 years. So I've been privy or victim, depending on the situation, to the changes over the years. Things like data engineering didn't even exist back in the day. To now, what I think is a good subject to kind of touch on, the latest and greatest, which everyone calls AI.
Mm.
Uh, I might modify that or preface that by saying, and I'm forgetting who I'm quoting, but narrow AI versus real AI, or I like to think of it as dumb AI versus actual AI. So we don't have actual AI, and we can't speak to that necessarily. Though we can talk about the ethical implications. People like Kurzweiler and those who are predicting its arrival one day. That's
Mm.
still many years off. Um,
Might be
so
there quicker than you're hoping for.
I know. Well, that's what I was just like. And Kurzweiler specifically, and I don't think I'm horrible at pronouncing names. So unless I've heard it said a million times, I'll always butcher it. Even Blake, I could get wrong if I hadn't already talked to you a few times. Who's this Blackie guy?
Well,
Anyway,
it's funny you say that because the last what is it? Actually, I apologize. I By the time I publish this, I don't know. We might be episode 12 or 13, but the last person I interviewed, I did the whole video, I edited the whole thing, and I totally messed up their name and the spelling. And I was like, oh, gotta go back and do some edits.
right.
Yeah.
No, I like to think I have a classic Anglo-Saxon, though for some reason, even with those of us history buffs, there's a historic house of Burgesses in
Yeah.
British history. I still get it pronounced Burgess all the time. And you're just like, people see the name Murphy, they don't go, "Who's this Murphy guy?" It's like they got that one. There are other. Now, granted, Murphy's Law is a much better one. That's got a nice adage that we all use in our probably far too often in our lives. But
So fun history fact. Now we're definitely gonna get off track, but
I
I
oh, so
so
well, back to get us back on track. One of my favorite history people, and in fact, somebody asked me what the last book I read was, actual full book, made of paper. People will see this later and will ask, what is this book stuff you're talking about? With bindings and whatnot, was Failed States by Noam Chomsky.
hmm.
And he, at least in that book, he's talking about politics and a failed state being one that doesn't serve its people. But I was more recently curious what his perspective was on the dumb AI, if you
Hmm.
will. And he did not have a very flattering, just maybe a quick quote. Uh, he started with, so he's a bit long winded, so I've got some summarization, of course, in there. But the key
All
element,
good.
yeah. First, we should recognize that a huge part of the discussion around ChatGPT and other devices is totally groundless, which I thought was the first meaning.
Hmm.
All the discussion we're having is actually about the implications of the actual AI or smart AI. The tool, uh, most people know, I guess, the term large language model, this new AI that we're all having fun with and everything. He calls um, these things, so he says these things have nothing to do with modern thought or much beyond just individual uses. In principle, they can tell us nothing about language, about learning, about intelligence, about thought. He just says nothing. So with somebody who has a brain as big as his, I could understand he's just like, well, I am a large language model. Uh, they could do some sophistication things like programmatically, it is a complex setup. I mean, I personally am still kind of learning about, focusing on, I think it was Stanford created Llama, or rather used Llama to create alpaca. I don't know if you've heard of this,
Mm,
but
mm,
so Stanford took, and Llama is Meta's large language model
okay.
that they created open source, as opposed to say Chat GPT, which is still closed, and they make it available for research institutions and stuff. And I did pay for the $20 a month subscription so I could play with 4.0 and see how smart it really is.
I'm
I've not
thinking
used
about it myself.
it. I've not used it quite to the extent of. So Stanford took the Llama, which is the open source Meta large language model, more simplistic than the Chat GPT one, but they trained it for a total of $600, and the training they used was actually Chat GPT. So they fed
Oh,
something like 55,000 ish statements into Chat GPT. It took the return, computed that with about $600 of CPU costs, and created a pretty much reasonable facsimile of ChatGPT 4.0 for
wow.
$600. Yes. So they call that alpaca. I think because it was built on llama. So,
I
keeping these.
I know they couldn't help that. I could tell that the engineers there, they just couldn't help themselves with that one.
Some guy was in the middle of the night was like, oh my gosh, I've got the perfect name.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, yeah, the acronyms, you're like, okay, like I clearly you just had to bend that one around for your own fun. But I
Yeah.
think that the crazy implication of that is like I have no coding background besides Hello Python World.
Right. Right.
And you could get someone like me and I could basically use some of these tools and I could pump out an insane amount of code. And really, I don't need to understand how to code at that point. I just need to understand how to read. Like, I just need to understand where I'm making grammatical errors. It'd almost be like when you read something and you're like, I just feel like that shouldn't be there rather than actually understanding.
You're an editor for an input to the system rather than. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think what a lot of people in that open letter, I think I've got somewhere some notes about who signed on, the dangers of AI and how we got to slow down and stuff. And it's like, uh, one, I'm not sure I agree with that, just because trying to slow down, and I get a bit nationalistic and think of, in competition, it's like, do you think people in China are slowing down? I just watched,
Oh,
on that note, a combo of large language model and deep fake utilization. So you look for this on your LinkedIn scroll. Somebody is creating virtual debates between.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like with random people. I saw it was like Steve Jobs arguing with an old Elon Musk.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
one that I enjoyed the most, and see if you get a chance for this one, is Bill Gates arguing with Socrates.
Okay.
Yeah, on what education, or how education will be affected. And I thought it was also interesting the accent they had, seeing as he's 1,200 years prior to the creation of the English language. So what a did they take a modern Greek person and then kind of extrapolate, or anyway? So that was a whole
Well,
nother thing.
here's a random. I'm not. I mean, this is maybe we can tie it back to data somehow. But even 10 years ago, what they would do. So if everybody knows, so I can flash off my degree. I do have a master's in history, so I do know randomly unnecessary facts about these kind of subjects. That they would take like a 3D scan of, let's say, the lungs of like a mummy, And then they're like, well, based on the size, based on the age, based on all these things, this person's voice, based on that accent, based on all this stuff, it would probably have sounded like this. So it's like
Right.
they take all those data points. Yeah, exactly. The size of their neck, all this stuff. And they'd be like, they probably sounded like this. But yeah, with someone like Socrates, we have no, I mean, they're just kind of like throwing it out there because, I mean, it's a nice thought, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting too because of the if I'm reminded of I waffled around in college in my bachelor's years. I think I started out in engineering, science, and then ended up in history with business and other things in the middle, philosophy as well. And there was this one class. It was I forget, it might have been the intro 2011, something like that. But the class teacher was like, or professor, full professor was like, all right, we had read Plato's, like through the Apology and everything. And the teacher was like, all right, room, I want you to split into two half. People who think that Socrates was guilty of corrupting the citizens or the children of Athens and should have been killed, this side. And then those who thought, it was an unjust assertion and should have just been freed, should go. It was split down the middle.
Huh.
This is after learning about what Socrates, essentially was no, try not to too much history dork out. The general's son, who was one of Socrates' students, who historically, I think we all know Socrates had relationships with his students.
Yeah.
This general was not a fan of that, right? So he's the one who got the corruption or corrupting Athenian youth as a charge brought against him, right?
Yes.
I think, as we all know in the story, Socrates kills himself instead because, he's offered the chance to escape, but he also didn't want Athens to essentially kill somebody who's innocent. So he was stuck through and killed himself. So anyway,
Well,
I'm not sure
and
that they were right. Like, did
and
they get all that into his perspective of this deep fake AI?
I don't know. Well, maybe you could say, tying this back to data, maybe Socrates, he was so hardcore about people being able to question things and find the truth that I think that his followers like offered him an escape route the night before his
Yeah,
execution. And it was kind of like, from their understanding, like the people in charge knew about it. So they could say, oh, he ran away. And he's like, no, I'm not running away. If I can't speak the truth, I'm going to drink this hemlock.
because that's also bad for society. If he had
Mm.
escaped, he would have undermined the laws of Athens and actually been guilty potentially of the crime that he was innocent of, which is, undermining the laws of a society is potentially, but is the law unjust? Whole nother questions to be answered by his predecessors or students, rather.
So I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here. Like, he'd walk around, from my understanding, from what I've read, he'd walk around and be like, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Why are rocks hard? And people are like, can you just shut up? And like, I feel like
Yeah.
some versions of AI that are there are just doing stuff like they just don't. It's like they're just like grappling with like most basic things. Like they don't, a lot of them don't conceptually understand the idea of polling, and then it asks like, why does it poll? Or like, things like this. And you're like, it's kind of like not philosophically, it's almost like it is developing that basic level that probably like a little kid learns things.
I was just thinking, and the little kid typically learns things, maybe not in specifically for Socrates, but the sort of this idea of, I have all of these data points or knowledge to work with, and I propose questions, and can I answer? So another thing that Chomsky said about AI is it's essentially sophisticated high tech plagiarism, right? So
Kind of, yeah.
the let's say He also called it, just a quick quote, incredible technique. What it is and what it can do is you be used for defamation and disinformation, uh, as well as, if you will, looking shit up much quicker than I. So that child that's walking around asking these questions, it would be like having a little notepad that told them all the answers all the time,
Yeah.
based on the fact that humans previously had come up with these answers, if you will, right?
Here's my hot take on it too, is like people are like, oh, all this defamation, fake news. I'm like, on the flip side, you can also gear those tools towards seeking out that fake news, like flagging it, things like that. So it's a double-edged sword. Just as it does bad, it does good. And I
Yeah.
am like, when they created the printing press, they made the ability for people to spread fake or weird things, and
Yeah,
the
political,
internet and
right?
typewriters, and it just doesn't stop.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. Starting with the Gutenberg press all the way to today's deep fakes of large language model backed computer representations, you essentially have tools to have one human or multiple humans or the entire knowledge of humanity either talk. Can I swear on this talk?
Sure. Yeah.
Or tell truths,
Yeah.
right? And it can do both very well.
Yeah.
It's quite adaptive, and that's, you can blame humans for giving it centuries of knowledge to work with. The Where was it? I think it was let's see, the Bill Gates perspective is the one that I tend to kind of have more affinity for when I think of. And again, we're talking dumb AI this whole time, if you will, right?
Hmm.
Which is represented through large language models. We have a few different ones, some better than others, some available to the public for a small nominal fee. Others will be embedded into tools without even us knowing. We've been using large language models or backed AI tools like what's my like type ahead, right? As a simplistic, we've had it on our website for about a decade, and you can it'll predict what you think you'll write, and it's making assumptions. It's not always right. It's sort of the beginnings, if you will, of this inference or the illusion of inference. What it's actually doing is making an assumption based on all of the available data it has, and then spitting that back out. Which is why, what was it? I'm trying to remember the name. When Microsoft put a chatbot out there like 5, 6 years ago, it took like one day for it to become racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic. I don't know if you remember the name of it, but Microsoft had to take it down. This is about 6 years ago, and it's because it was using the inputs from the chats themselves, right?
Hmm.
So, being generally, unfortunately, as a large world, it's a very sexist, racist, anti-Semitic at times. Like all of these negative elements, and then it just starts spitting out, like crazy stuff about how great Hitler was and that kind of stuff, right?
It's unfortunately, yeah, they can. So that's the. I think that was the original problem. Was like this was like 3 years ago. I remember seeing this like 2019, 20, probably like 2018 or 2019. They're like,
And I'm just feeling old. Like it was years ago.
well, even for me, I'm like, oh, it's only 2018. I'm like, hey, Blake, that was 5 years ago. I'm like, no, it wasn't.
I'm not that old.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I guess the application of this dumb AI, we really just have to, rather than, at least in my opinion, rather than try to slow it down. Well, and maybe to conclude Chomsky's observation is he doesn't really care. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't come up with new ideas, right? It's only regurgit. It's not like the human mind, which there was another quote where it's, and I don't think I wrote this one down, but somebody said essentially the human mind is something that can take a small, finite amount of information or input and come up with infinite ideas and conclusions. Ultimately, I mean, just as an example, the mentally ill, you can give them, they will spit out a different response than a non-mentally ill person given, the same inputs. Uh,
Hmm.
Back to, sort of the Einstein, if, you do something more than once in the same way and expect two different results, you're crazy. That's not the exact quote, but essentially, don't expect different results if you don't change the way you do something or the inputs that are coming in.
100%. And I'm like, I think people, because it's like more accessible for people to talk about, fake news and these things. It's easy for people to engage with, but like you mentioned Einstein, and I saw the that trailer for the new Oppenheimer movie. Have
Oh,
you?
I've not seen that.
So that one looks really good. It has the guy from Peaky Blinders as like the lead
Okay.
playing Oppenheimer, but you think back then like how even research was done was you just bring a ton of people into a lab or one. I guess they just brought everybody to a camp in the middle of the desert. Like you were all researching, we're all working 18, 20 hours a day, or like 18 hours a day on this project.
Right.
We're trying to win the war. And then just imagine that's humans like manually looking at the page, manually doing this, manually writing it down, bringing it to a meeting, talking about it, and then just imagine like all that data, like maybe years of work sucked up in like 10 minutes or 5 minutes or maybe even less. I don't know. And then it's like, just like spits out that answer. And I think, like,
Sorry.
especially too, I work with some biotech companies, and that's
Right.
what's kind of happened with COVID and stuff too, is like you could just run scenario, 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 and you get to an answer way quicker than if you're doing the classic kind of scientific method.
Think tank kind of, bring great minds together, and it's in. I was getting interrupty because I was passionate about at the same time that's going on, and more apropos to getting us back onto data. Alan Turing is
Mm,
creating the first digital computer, right? At the same time in 1941, in order to break the Enigma machine, which was Germany's code writing. So over in England, and we were like this close to calling it Turing science instead of computer science, right? But he had a whole different sad story due to
it,
what we'll call it intolerance
it,
generally, despite him having next to the new he's credited as essentially ending the eastern side or the German side of World War
mhm.
II, while the nuclear weapon is credited for, say, ending the Japanese side of the
It's kind
war.
of crazy too, because so kind of a personal connection. My grandfather, so he served in World War II, and he actually was working with the U.S. Navy, kind of helping develop those first set of computers. So I always wonder when I saw that movie, like, what level did he ever meet him? I never got to talk to him. He passed away,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
before I was alive. But I was like, those are very interesting. Kind of that whole development process. And I think if it's easier for people to look at that because like World War II, it's like there's all this like such a huge part of history. But then you look at how they brought information, how they made those decisions, and like the computer was a fast calculator. The first computer, it was the size of like 3 rooms combined, and that was
I,
amazing.
right, IBM's analog counting device or whatever at the time.
E- Exactly. And actually, my grandfather went on to become the equivalent of like CTO, whatever they called that role in the 50s.
Right, right. They didn't have that yet.
Yeah, exactly. But back then, all it was a giant computer. So it just sped up our processing time. And then I feel like computers sped up our processing time, right? Of like just bringing information together. The internet sped it up more. And now, I mean, really, we haven't had I think this is going to be that massive shift, not chat GPT, but that technology base,
For
you
sure.
know?
Yeah, the ability to bring so much knowledge and data together and have it actually be used in a product as a whole, like the entirety of human history and knowledge and what it's just a question of how many petabytes of data do you have available and that you rigged up to your large language model, if you will, for the start of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also on that observation, you're talking about this progression, and this is something I learned a while ago in a philosophy is I think it was called Of Dreams. It was this you like where somebody drew over the top of 8 millimeter film, kind of like a Scanner Darkly, but this prior to that. Anyway, there. So it's just a bunch of dream conversations where this guy is the main character is traveling and talking to these different professors and people who see the world different and unique. And the one that and this is really relevant to data, especially today and then the next decade. The time between these shifts is shrinking. So we're accelerating. Not only are we coming up with this stuff, but the time to delivery, if you will, or time to shift, or even and this includes culturally, socially, things like that. That turnaround time, our parents or grandparents, they didn't have new like really new things coming out every. Now it's like a decade ago, cloud technology and the smartphone, right? A decade prior to that was just like, well, cell phones have been around for a while, but sort of this mass adoption of using cell phones, or at the same time, social and cultural changes that go along with it, which is to say, like the uprisings in Egypt and things like that, supported by new technology, or as simple as I use text. I don't call anyone anymore, right? I use text as a method. Well, 30 years ago, that wasn't an option, right? Well, honestly, even 20 years ago, you'd have to hit the button like 3 frickin' times to get one letter. And it's like, this is bullshit. Let me just call somebody. Uh,
Nokia open face phone,
right. Flip phone.
Motorola Razor. Yeah.
So to that point, and this is something I talk with my employees about, is the speed at which data products specifically has shifted just in the last 5 years and my 6 years in my current position is nothing like it was 5 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We were rigging even the simple fact of having, and we can maybe thank capitalism for this one. Sometimes I have to. Uh,
I love
New
it.
tools, new tools coming out in a due to competition that make it easier and faster for time to delivery of data products generally, which has
Mm-hmm.
just accelerated everyone, including those of us lowly utilizing the tools and those who are building the tools themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not surprised that, let's say, as an example, Chat GPT-3 a year or two ago when it first came out had a 10% pass bar rate. Chat GPT-4, which took, I think, less than a year after the initial GPT-3. I'm not sure that was their initial. They might have spent a lot of time. I didn't do that
Well,
much research for this. I have
from
to.
from my understanding, your I think your time is right, but like they had GPT-3 on the market for about 4 months, but they had
Right,
already had it running for some time.
right. Like they had been working on it for a while behind the scenes, right? And then four took that to a 90% or 95% pass rate. And then on like bio something, essentially the biotech or bioengineer, I forgot what it was, but one of the reasons I didn't become a doctor, subject, has like 100% pass rate. And you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, well, not, and this is with the back to that letter that 1,000 people signed recently, including like Wozniak, uh, Musk. Though I do appreciate the things as an intellectual, I'm not so impressed by his name being on it or not being on it. But when you've
Yeah.
got people, you know what I mean, like uh, then there are people who did not sign, like Bill Gates, who is also an
Yeah.
intellectual. So there's a there's the Mark Cubans and Elon Musk's out there who have a lot to say, and I think this is why Chomsky was saying that most of the discussion about AI is just bullshit, essentially. Uh,
I feel like you could probably relate to this, and popular, unpopular opinion warning. Feel like whenever there's people like Elon Musk or Joe Rogan attached to something, all of a sudden it's either really good or really bad, and it's like it's just
yes,
not how these things work, and
I
it's just annoying. Like, just because he says it's bad doesn't actually mean it's bad. But you have a million tech bros in the valley and
mhm.
all over the bay. They're like, "Oh no, bro, you're not gonna like, my son is bad, so like, it's bad, bro." And you're
I
like, "Did you
I like
research it?"
to really have an opinion on this, and it's relevant, and people should hear this opinion, even though I've got no frame of reference of actual implications on society as a whole. It's like it's very few minds can understand both how this shit actually works and what are the real implications on society and the economy as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And like we're lucky we do have a few people, and I never thought, honestly, 20, 30 years ago, I never thought I'd be like, Bill Gates, we need more from you.
Yeah,
uh, you know
we need you back in the ring.
right. He spent that time in Africa solving malaria, which he
Yeah,
did. Malaria now has a treatment,
that's
which that just came out a year or two ago. Well,
well,
and this is also due to ultimately data, and data of it, the tools that allow for, going back to what you're saying, it used to be like five of the smartest men in the world, or 10, would sit in a room for months or years and not even and have to write on chalkboards and shit. And now it's like companies don't even need any of those people. They can utilize tools that kind of create that environment with no
mhm.
people involved at all. uh,
Absolutely true, and I think it's just gonna it's a good development. It
yeah,
yeah, if I can talk, democratizes information.
exactly. So I definitely land on the side of, sure, any tool, like a hammer, that can still kill somebody,
Uh-huh.
but we use it to build things, right? Like it's also a key element to how the house I'm in was put together.
Yes.
Um, that being said, same is true of large language or dumb AI. Dumb
Hmm.
AI can be used to create, and I would argue the fake conversations between Bill Gates and Socrates is a dumb or fruitless effort, but it isn't causing harm, if you will. But
Yeah.
people can use it to cause harm, and I'm curious to see how is this going to be leveraged in a negative way, especially in authoritarian states,
Yeah.
or not to get too political, but there's a wide variety of governments that will care or not care, or at even worse, utilize it for and this
Prop-
is
Propaganda.
yeah, exact. I was actually going to use the term political correctness because I learned something recently. That term was invented by Stalin, or well, somebody who worked for Stalin. And political correctness is actually the USSR's product. They came up with what political correctness is. Now, of course, they defined it with things that are bad about Russia or the USSR are not politically correct. And we,
Hmm.
of course, have adapted it to more like societal perspectives that are popular.
Norms.
Right, exactly. And that's not politically correct to say
Getting
it.
your, yeah, making sure your drunk uncle doesn't go off the handle at
Right,
Thanksgiving.
right, but he will anyhow, and we accept him for it. So then we just take away the wine,
Yeah, you take
right,
away his drink
and
and you're
you're
like, you're done.
right, your young niece and nephew who are like potentially either cross gender or cross race or whatever cross ethnicity, more offended than say a old white man like myself who's now falling behind in the because
Gotta
like
get gotta get updated on the times, man.
the terminology it's important to people, and I
Hmm.
think that's where large language models can help not just children, but it can help a lot of us understand this ever and not this specific issue, but just society and culture and how quickly it's moving back to that. It's moving in a or it's evolving in a quicker and quicker pace. So
So are you
political
saying, Brent, that
correct
AI can help your drunk uncle learn and improve and become better at a faster rate?
or more racist, sexist, and drunk and
Oh
offensive,
no.
right? No, that's his choice, I guess.
I see it now. I see the point. Yeah.
Right. So it can be used as this tool for education for people like myself. That's my hope. Like as an example, the R word, right? Um, just to clarify, using the word retarded is
Hmm.
no longer socially acceptable. But I
Hmm.
used it for so many years when it wasn't seen. I mean, it still wasn't acceptable for those people who were handicapped or disabled. I'm not even sure
But
which that is.
yeah, I mean,
Still,
it's kind of an interesting thing because it's like even my dad's 67, so it's like the stuff that was normal when he grew up super is not okay to
yeah.
talk about and stuff like that. And that's just how society changes. We learn, we get better,
I've got
and
one better.
maybe we're at the diverging point where we can kind of be like, hey, do we want to become the best version of ourselves, or is it going to unlock that really bad version of
Does
ourselves?
is it those echo chambers that some people live in, right? Is it just going to like make them worse potentially? And we've got other subjects to talk about potentially, like Facebook and how and Google and their algorithms and how that promotes it.
or
But I've
or,
got one maybe. I know we're
or
near time here, but
yeah, we
my
both got
dad
to jump.
was born in 1938, and he's used terms that weren't, he's not. If anything, he's from Massachusetts. He passed away, so I should say he was from Massachusetts.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, and he's used some terms that back in 1930, 1942, when he was 4, he would have heard from his dad that even if he wasn't of a, like he definitely still sexist, right? But as he grew older, he had to adapt to society. But you can only bring people so far, and unless they're of this, meaning, I being of the, let's say, information age, born after the invention of the personal computer or the Apple Lucy's invention, if you will, by a few
Hmm.
years. Not to date myself here. Um, not that anybody I knew could get a hold of it, but you're from San Jose, right?
Yes.
So I'm from Marin.
Okay.
So I too was in the area here as we've taken off, right? And the world kind of blew, again, these events that just change the entire world and how they trickle out. And if you weren't born, it seems, if you weren't born with that like kind of initial open mind that seems to be a product of the generations post computer, I'm not sure so meaning somebody younger than me who still thinks dumb crap like Putin is defending Russia, or some kind of bullshit propaganda or whatever. You're just like, well, they're actually just a victim of the wrong technology, right? They're not necessarily not open to the idea that they're wrong. Well, some of them might be, but they didn't come up with that, right? They're not
That's very
scholars,
true. Yeah,
right?
no, I've seen that. And I feel like the algorithms are driving us there. And I'm kind of curious to see if we can build in safety mechanisms to AI to maybe break that down. Or
Right.
if companies
Create the utopia we want to live in through mitigating or moderating it.
or the old school, I know we both got to jump here, but like old final closing thought, like how they used to have news, they would make them say both sides of some kind of political argument. The
Right.
AI has to spit out, hey, does this person do this? And then it's like, what are the thoughts? What's the good or bad of this? And it'll just be like, this group of people thinks this people group think this group of people thinks this, and it forces you, so you can't just ignore what you don't like, because right now we're allowed to ignore what we don't like.
And, if anything, maybe my last thought is you might have just found another career that is going to be eliminated by large language models, and that's the newscaster.
We'll see. We'll just have like a robot up there.
Oh no, they've got great deep fakes. It'll still be Don. Well, not Don Lemon. He just got canned. But they'll still put. Hell, let's put Brokaw back on. We trusted him 50 years ago. Let's just have Brokaw
My
give
name
us
is Tom Brokaw.
virtual Brokaw.
We'll
Awesome.
close with the virtual Brokaw thought, but thank you for taking the time out, Brent, and you have a great day. Okay, man.
You as well. Talking to you, Blake. Talk soon.
Peace.
Bye.